thank you very much. That was absolutely fascinating. As we're running over a wee bit, but I don't think it's too much of a problem. We do have a number of questions that have come up in the Q&A, which some of you might be able to see at the side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the questions that we're posing. Hopefully, Callum sitting in the background with his magic IT fingers, I'll be able to make them appear on screen and answer your questions. So fingers crossed that this works. So I suppose the first one, I'm just literally going down the list, is for Tertia. Is there more art on some types of rocks, e.g. sandstone, which is easy to carve?
Oh, hi there. Well, it's interesting that, and it's a question that's often asked because a lot of the rock art in England is on sandstone, and so there has been a sort of presumption that it was more likely to be on sandstone than other rocks. But geology and rock art in Scotland is very varied, and we have a lot of rock art on non-sandstone rocks. For example, in Argyll, it's all on mainly on schist, and further north in Scotland, there's even some on granite and Louisian gneiss. So it's more really a case of people wanting, carving in areas where there's rock more than the type of rock, rock it is. Although there is, in areas where we get a mixture of sandstone and other rocks, often there is a bit more selectivity in carving the sandstone.
Okay, thank you. The next one is also for you, I think. Oh. It's a big one. It's rock art. Any idea who made it and why? Remember, we all want to go for lunch, Tertia.
No.
Okay, that was.
This is the big question, isn't it? What does it mean? Why did people make it? Who made it? It's very difficult to tell that. I mean, I'm assuming the question is who made it. Do we mean male, female, adults, children, and so on? Again, we have no idea. There have been experiments in terms of experimental carving with different genders and ages of people, and basically anybody can make rock art. You don't have to be a big burly man. Children can make it, can create the same markings as easily as adults, and so on. So we don't know who made it. And as to why, there's lots of theories, as I tried to show a little bit in the talk. There are lots of theories. Everybody has a pet theory. We'll probably never know. I mean, it probably didn't have one single meaning. It probably had multiple layered meanings and meant different things to different people at different times and in different contexts. So trying to understand what was going on in people's minds, 5,000 years ago is very difficult to reconstruct. But we're trying to edge closer to an understanding more about why it was significant to people, not necessarily what it actually meant.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. I don't think I'm live yet, but anyway, John, there's a couple of questions for you. I see you've partially answered them. I'll give you a chance to elaborate on that. The first one is, are you worried about the disease risk for digging plague pits?
Personally, no, because I didn't do it. No, not any of the pathogens would have been completely gone by the time. It's a bacterium that I believe that lives in the flesh, so the flesh is gone. Also, the soil conditions. We did a full health and safety check about lots of conditions. TB was possibly the most contentious one, which may survive. Maybe some smallpox inside the ground. We know there's none. So the health expert said you're fine to dig them up. So that's good enough for me.
Thanks for that. I'm glad to hear that. The second one again is for you. Is what happens to human remains after excavation? I think we've had this one at every conference.
We do. Yeah, sorry, Andy. In this case, we went to court. It's very hard to rebury. Almost impossible to rebury them back in Leith because there's no space. Because we're digging up thousands of others just to put them back in. And we made a very conscious decision that the council is going to look after them in the long term. We've got an archaeological collection, well, the front part of our archaeological collection. So we've taken ownership. We went to court and they're very happy with that. So in this instance, the council have taken, well, as they do with other burials, we'll look after them in the long term.
Brilliant, thank you. The last question I've got is for Ursula. how could observing church law on fasting be reflected in the prevalence of marine-based diets?
On fasting.
Yeah.
So fasting is actually something that I'm quite interested in personally, and it's something that I've been able to look into more deeply in Aberdeen, because we do have a local population of grey friars excavated, and it seems to influence well, their fasting means basically the greater focus on fish, because they don't really consume the four-legged creatures, and instead they substitute it with marine fish. However, so what we see is that essentially these ecclesiastical individuals would be extremely elevated in nitrogen and carbon. But if you mean fasting in a sense of actually not really consuming food, that's a different question. So long-term, for example, long-term periods of not consuming enough food would lead to the alteration of isotopes, of isotopic values as well. But in particular, your nitrogen would be elevated, because essentially you kind of start to consume your own tissues. But detecting this in bone collagen would be really hard, because we are looking at like an average diet here through a long time period. So what you would have to do to identify that, you would have to look at more nuanced data. So for example, incremental dentinal material, or if you're lucky you have hair, you can look into changes in diet through time. So it depends. It depends what you are asking with fasting, really.
Well, thank you. That I think that covered it.
Okay.
Well, there doesn't seem to be any further questions. So I suppose the last thing to do is thank all the speakers this morning. You were all fantastic, and that worked. Thankfully, that worked really well. And also to thank Steph for being in the background and sorting out the questions, because there was various things flashing on screens here that I was going to go, no, I can't cope with them all. So the next session starts at 1 o'clock. Back here at the same place. I'm not going to say go and queue up for your lunch this time. And if you've all made your little sandwiches and cups of tea and border biscuits in the packets, we'll all be doing well. But thank you very much for everybody's efforts this morning, and I'll be handing over to John and Keith. And for this afternoon, will I go and find a bottle of wine and a cake? Thanks very much, everybody.